I knew we were circling the corporate drain the moment I walked into my office and found a stranger's sneakers, muddy knockoff designer shoes, planted on my desk like it was a footrest at a college fraternity house. My chair, my ergonomic lumbar supporting seat that I had guarded like a bank vault for 20 years, was occupied by a 28-year-old man-child with frosted tips, a vape pen, and the self-awareness of a goldfish. He grinned big and dumb and said, "Yo, you must be Oliver. Dad said you would be relaxed about this." Then, because there is no arrogance quite like nepotism with a wireless internet connection, he pulled out his phone, angled it like he was launching a vanity video, and snapped a picture of himself sitting at my desk. Not near it, not beside it, but directly in it. Then he uploaded it to his social media page with the caption, "Finally running this place." That was the moment my heart did not sink. It turned to stone. I had seen this kind of child before. You do not spend 20 years turning a third-rate warehouse tracking system into a multi-million-dollar logistics platform without meeting every flavor of executive parasite. I had dealt with the empty suits, the idea thieves, and the self-proclaimed visionaries who could not operate a basic document printer without a video tutorial. But Hunter Caldwell, was a new breed. He was not pretending to be competent. He was not even pretending to care. He was flaunting his ignorance like it came with stock options. The thing was, I was not angry. Not yet. I was completely calm. It was the kind of calm that comes from knowing you had already laid the trap 6 months ago. I was the only person reading the fine print at 2 in the morning while the rest of the executive team was toasting their investment round with expensive alcohol. I knew page 58 of the acquisition agreement by heart. It was buried under a mountain of corporate merger paperwork. Clause 7. Any instance of reputational damage, misrepresentation of executive access, or breach of confidentiality by an employee or associated party would result in immediate contract termination at the buyer's sole discretion. And Hunter Caldwell, bless his tiny, unwrinkled brain, had just publicly declared on a digital record, complete with a location tag and timestamp, that he was running the company from my desk on the very first day of the acquisition transition. Now, I know what you are thinking. Why did I not lose my temper? Why did I not flip the desk or go into a viral rage? Because I am Oliver Reynolds. I do not shout, I forward documents. But before I tell you what I did next, and believe me, it was surgical, let me say one thing. If you are listening to this and have not subscribed yet, please do. Most of you just float through like Hunter in a staff meeting, and it breaks my cold, calculated heart. Hit that subscribe button. It tells our team that these late nights and endless writing sessions are worth it. Let us keep going. I did not even make eye contact with him after he posted that image. I simply walked to the printing room, retrieved the acquisition document pack I had memorized months ago, highlighted Clause 7 in bright yellow ink, and slid it into a routing envelope with a single note that said, "Review Clause 7 Compliance." Then I attached a printed copy of the social media post, complete with the location, the timestamp, and his smiling face, looking like a discount pop singer. I sent the package to our internal legal department. I copied no one, but I secretly blind copied the entire board of directors. I walked back to my office, or rather, the office that used to be mine, and packed a single cardboard box. It was not a dramatic exit. I just took my framed photo of my dog, a storage drive containing the version history of our core database architecture, and my favorite coffee mug that said, "I survived another meeting." I left my access badge sitting face up on Hunter's new desk. His feet were still up, and he was staring at his phone. He did not even look up. The human resources staff saw me carrying my box and waved, asking if I was taking a half day. "Something like that," I replied. They did not know what was coming. No one did. But the beauty of software systems, especially the ones I build, is that they always log exactly who is sitting at the console when the crash occurs. And Hunter had just leaned all the way into the controls. I walked out of that building like a shadow, silent and already gone. No one stopped me, and no one asked questions. The acquisition deal had not even been announced to the public yet. But by the time they realized what Clause 7 meant, the fuse would already be burnt. Let the show begin. I took the long way to my vehicle, walking past the loading bays where the shipping trucks hummed. The forklifts beeped their warning signals in a steady rhythm. I had written the scheduling logic that kept those loading bays from turning into a complete disaster zone. None of the drivers out there knew my name, and that was exactly how I liked it. I did not need popularity. I just needed my code to run without errors. During the early days of this company, we only had 5 small servers in a dark basement, and I spent 70 hours a week keeping them running. Now we manage shipping routes across 40 states, and the executives who did not understand a single line of Python thought it was all magic. Once I reached my car, I sat in the driver's seat and opened my laptop. The email had already been delivered. The subject line read, Clause 7 Reputational Breach. There were no pleasantries, no polite greetings, just a single screenshot, a direct quote from the merger contract, and a short explanation pointing out the violation. It was the kind of message that does not just sit in an inbox, it demands immediate attention. I closed my laptop. I did not slam it, I just shut the lid quietly like closing a book. I drove to the secure storage facility where I kept my independent consulting records. It was a small space that nobody at Fortress Logistics ever asked about, mostly because they did not know it existed. The air inside the storage corridor smelled of dust and cardboard, a quiet refuge from the chaotic corporate offices. I unlocked the metal cabinet and pulled out the thick binder I had compiled the day the acquisition negotiations first started appearing on our internal communications. I had labeled it in bold letters, Emergency Exit Strategy. Inside were the original registration documents for my independent business, Reynolds Systems Consulting LLC, which I had established 3 years ago. I also had the independent patent filings and software licensing agreements. You see, when the CEO, Preston Caldwell, first mentioned bringing in outside consultants to help transition our company, I knew what was coming. The founders get replaced, the engineers get pushed out, and suddenly your system operations are outsourced to cheap contractors who do not know a database from a spreadsheet. So, I had built my exits. Every core operational database I had created had a dependencies framework. There was a specific piece of middleware, a license token, that belonged entirely to my LLC. It was used by Fortress Logistics with my permission, a permission that could be terminated with 48 hours of written notice. The buyer, Summit Industrial Holdings, did not know this because they had never looked past the main interface. But they would find out soon. Under United States copyright laws, specifically Title 17, Section 106 of the United States Code, my intellectual property was fully protected. Any company attempting to use or transfer my proprietary integration code without a valid license would be committing federal copyright infringement. The moment Clause 7 triggered their contract withdrawal, they would be searching for a way to save the deal. They would want a path forward that did not involve Preston Caldwell or his son, Hunter. And when that happened, they would discover that the digital infrastructure they wanted to buy did not belong to the company they were purchasing. It belonged to me. I checked my personal email on my phone. There was a folder marked Merger Progress. It contained every non-disclosure agreement, every contract draft, and every implementation log. I went through the files. 6 months ago, when the transition planning began, Preston had asked me to simplify our technical agreements. He wanted the documentation to be easy to read for his incoming executive associates. So I complied. I made the system elegant, but I also made it dependent on my software. I isolated the core logistics layer. The company saw faster processing speeds and assumed it was just cloud optimization. They had no idea the entire architecture was now routed through my personal company. By the time I arrived at my house, the initial rush of energy had faded. I felt a deep, cold calm. It is the feeling of holding the only key to the building while everyone else is trapped inside arguing. I made a hot cup of tea, sat by my window, and watched the notifications begin to arrive. The first message was from the lead corporate attorney, confirming they had received my notice and were reviewing it immediately. Then came a message from the purchasing department, asking for clarification on the licensing terms of the analytics system. The first cracks were appearing in the foundation. Once the structure started to lean, they would come looking for me, not to apologize, but out of absolute desperation. And I would be waiting, The corporate legal department did not even finish their morning coffee before someone in the compliance division realized the severity of the situation. My name carried a quiet authority in that building, the kind that made junior employees double-check their reports. When a message from my personal account arrived in the oversight inbox with the subject line, Clause 7 Reputational Breach, the entire room fell silent. Even the senior legal assistant, who had worked there for 30 years and survived 5 corporate restructurings, stopped what she was doing. The lawyers looked at each other in confusion, wondering why a senior software engineer would be sending an email citing a specific merger clause. They immediately printed the message, realizing this was not a standard complaint. At first, they hoped it was some sort of technical error, but then they opened the attachment. The screenshot of Hunter Caldwell's smiling face, taken from my desk, was clear. The caption, "Finally running this place," was visible. It was timestamped, verified, and posted while he was inside our secure corporate building during a critical transition window, before the acquisition had officially closed. The image showed his feet resting right next to my computer monitor, with his personal belongings scattered across the desk. It looked like he had already taken complete ownership of the space, showing no respect for the transition protocols. Clause 7 was not just standard template language. It had been inserted by Summit Industrial Holdings' legal team after weeks of intense negotiation and 3 separate late-night sessions. It was designed specifically to protect the buyer from executive misconduct or embarrassing public statements. The buyer was a highly conservative investment firm, extremely sensitive to public relations scandals, especially after a recent public failure involving one of their previous investments. The language of the contract was clear. Any representative of the company who caused reputational damage or falsely claimed operational control would trigger an immediate right for the buyer to withdraw from the deal. There would be no renegotiation, no penalties for the buyer, and no appeal process. The clause was a legal safety switch, and Hunter had walked right into it. The legal team gathered around the desk as the hard copy printed out. One of the younger lawyers asked if perhaps the post was just a joke. The senior assistant did not even look up from her screen. She replied that courts do not care about jokes, and neither do billionaire investors. The issue was not just the photo. It was the timing, the location, and the identity of the person who posted it. The son of the incoming chief executive officer had declared himself in control of our systems, using the desk of the person who built the entire platform. They ran a quick review of Hunter's social media accounts. It took about 40 minutes. His profiles were filled with boastful photos, expensive cars, and poorly written advice about business success. He seemed to have no filter online, posting regular updates about his father's business deals as if they were his own personal achievements. The desk selfie had already been shared by a major industry blog, with 95,000 followers. The buyer's legal team would definitely see it, if they had not already. By 9:15 in the morning, the legal department escalated the issue directly to Preston Caldwell. The subject line read, "Urgent Clause 7 Exposure Risk." They attached the proof, quoted the contract language, and used terms like material breach and contract nullification. The system showed he read it at 9:19. By 9:21, there was still no response. The board of directors was notified next. Board members across the country began replying within minutes, asking who Hunter was, why I had left, and if this was some kind of prank. By 10:10 in the morning, the buyer's transition team went completely silent. Scheduled meetings were canceled without explanation. The shared digital workspace that had been active for weeks became inactive. The first formal letter from the buyer's law firm arrived at 10:28. It was addressed to Preston Caldwell. The message was brief and cold. They demanded immediate clarification regarding the social media post and the role of Hunter Caldwell. They wanted to know if the statement represented an official change in leadership. Until they received a written response, all integration work was suspended. The entire transition process, which had taken 9 months to plan, came to a sudden halt. The board of directors was now in a state of panic, realizing that a single social media post had endangered a merger worth $130 million. They had ignored the engineering department for years, but now they were realizing that their entire business was built on a foundation they did not fully control. The silence from the buyer's side was deafening, and every member of the board knew that their options were rapidly disappearing. Preston Caldwell waited 40 minutes before replying. His response was typical of a man who believed his personal influence could solve any problem. He wrote that the individual was his son, who held no official title or authority. He claimed the post was just a poor attempt at humor and did not reflect the actual structure of the company. He promised to handle the issue internally, but it was too late. Hunter's post had already become a viral example of bad corporate behavior on professional networking sites. The buyer's internal chat channels, which I could still monitor through a backup access credential I had kept, were filled with concern. One director asked how the company could allow an unvetted relative to access the main systems desk on the very first day. The corporate reputation of our logistics business was being tarnished in real time, and there was nothing the marketing team could do to stop it. Middle managers were talking openly in the hallways, and several senior engineers began updating their resumes, expecting the company to collapse. Hunter, unaware of the crisis he had created, was still walking around the office, complaining about the quality of the coffee and asking coworkers for help logging into the administration network. When Preston finally ordered him into his office and demanded he delete the post, Hunter was confused. He argued that the photo had received over 650 likes. Preston took the phone from his hands, but the damage was done. The image had been saved and shared across dozens of websites. The buyer's legal team sent another message at 1:15 in the afternoon, officially suspending all onboarding activities and instructing our team to stop contacting them. Panic spread through the building. Directors walked the halls, whispering about financial liability. But Preston still believed he could talk his way out of it. He called an emergency meeting of the executives and told them not to overreact, claiming it was just an issue of public relations, not structure. The emergency board of directors meeting started at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. By 2:59, the virtual room was full. The directors were angry. Wallace Thorne, the oldest board member, opened the discussion by asking who had allowed Hunter access to my office and why I was no longer with the company. Preston tried to explain that it was just a casual visit. He poured himself a glass of water, his hands visibly shaking as he spoke, spilling some on his corporate papers. He tried to defend his son by saying Hunter was young and had simply made a minor mistake, but the board was not listening. Cynthia Shaw, one of the most detail-oriented directors, pointed out that the buyer was asking technical questions about our software integration, and there was no one left who could answer them. She asked if anyone had reviewed the licensing agreements for our core systems. The software integration plan, filed under the appendix of the acquisition paperwork, became the focus of the meeting. On page 22, they found the terms that locked the database connection modules. The legal team confirmed that the middleware was indeed proprietary, and any attempt to bypass or rewrite it would trigger copyright violations. The chief financial officer then revealed the most alarming news. The finance team had conducted a detailed analysis of our database dependencies. He explained that if the company attempted to replace my proprietary software layer, it would require at least 3 years of development and cost more than $5 million in fees. Our internal systems were completely dependent on the licenses held by my independent business, Reynolds Systems Consulting, LLC. The room went silent. Preston sat in silence, realizing that his position was rapidly collapsing. He had tried to treat the company like his personal family estate, but he had failed to notice the legal boundaries that protected the actual builders of the technology. The board members looked at each other, realizing that they had no technical backup plan. The next morning at 7:15, a courier delivered a formal document to our legal offices. It was a notice from Summit Industrial Holdings. They were exercising their right under Clause 7 to terminate the acquisition agreement immediately without any financial penalty. Preston looked at the document, his face turning pale. He claimed they could renegotiate, but the board members knew better. Clause 7 was a complete exit, and the buyer had pulled the lever. The entire board was now facing the reality of a failed merger, and the blame was pointing directly at the chief executive officer. Their reputation in the industry was ruined, and their stock value was about to plummet as soon as the news became public. The board members had to face the consequences of their hands-off management style, which had allowed Preston to run the company without proper accountability. They had focused entirely on short-term profits while ignoring the critical technical foundation. The board spent the rest of the morning searching through our technical files. They found the integration plan on page 22 of the appendix. It clearly stated that the core middleware was licensed from Reynolds Systems Consulting LLC, with all rights reserved. If the company wanted to run its logistics network, they had to pay my licensing fees. Even if the merger failed, the agreement remained valid. The board members realized that they could not even run their daily operations without my system code. The software was protected under federal copyright rules, and any attempt to bypass the license would lead to severe legal penalties under Title 17, Section 106 of the United States Code. The board realized they were completely stuck. They had no system, no buyer, and no lead engineer. At 8 o'clock in the morning, the board met to decide their next steps. Wallace Thorne led the meeting. The board voted unanimously to ban Hunter Caldwell from all company offices and systems. Then, they voted to place Preston Caldwell on immediate administrative leave. By 8:08 in the morning, Preston was escorted out of the building, his access revoked. The man who had tried to push me out of my own office was now leaving the building with his own belongings in a cardboard box. The board then sent me a formal email asking for a meeting to discuss the licensing terms and my potential return. I replied 10 minutes later, stating that my goal had always been to protect the system's integrity, but that they had allowed the damage to occur. I agreed to a virtual meeting that afternoon. The meeting was quiet. The board members sat in silence as the representative from Summit Industrial Holdings joined. The buyer's representative made it clear that they still wanted to purchase our system, but only if they could work with me directly. He asked if I would license the software to them. I agreed, but under my own terms, triple the original licensing fee and a seat on the board of directors with full voting rights. Sanjay Patel, one of the board members, tried to negotiate, asking if I would accept a standard consulting contract instead of a voting seat. I looked directly into the camera and refused. I explained to the board how the database architecture was designed. I pointed out that the entire system was configured to automatically lock down if it detected any unauthorized modifications or access attempts from outside our secure network. Without my active management, the entire platform would become completely useless within 48 hours. The representative from Summit Industrial Holdings smiled slightly and noted that having a technical expert on the board would actually provide much better oversight for their investment, which immediately ended Sanjay's attempts to negotiate. The board sat in absolute silence, staring at their screens. They had spent years ignoring the engineering department, assuming that the technology was just a commodity. Now they had to accept that the builder of the system was the one who held all the cards. The board had no choice but to agree. Wallace Thorne made the motion to approve, and it was seconded immediately. I did not celebrate or smile. I simply nodded, thanked them, and left the digital meeting. The official announcement was made later that week, stating that Preston Caldwell had left the company to pursue other interests. My name was restored to the systems, not as an employee, but as an owner. The company was forced to restructure, and the new management team made it clear that nepotism would no longer be tolerated. Once the cleaner management structure was implemented, our operational efficiency actually increased by 30%, proving that getting rid of unqualified executives was the best decision the company could have made. By evening, I was sitting on my porch as a summer storm began to gather. The wind was cool, and the sound of thunder rolled in from the distance. My phone buzzed with new messages, consulting requests from other firms, invitations to speak at industry events, and notes from former colleagues. I did not reply immediately. I just drank my jasmine tea and watched the rain start to fall. I had built the system, I had protected it, and in the end, the system had protected me. The corporate chess game was over, and the final moves had been made in silence. The system was now secure, and I was finally in control of my own creation. I realized that the corporate ladder was not something you had to climb if you already owned the ground it stood on. They had tried to push me out, but they had only succeeded in giving me total control of my own future. As the rain fell harder against the porch steps, I turned off my laptop and smiled.